When former Texas Ranger Jonah McCord pulled a burlap sack from the frozen waters of Ironwood Creek on that bitter February morning in 1887, he expected to find another rancher's drowned livestock. What he found instead was a dying infant girl whose tiny fingers wrapped around his calloused hand as she whispered a single word that would shatter 8 years of self-imposed silence. Mama. That moment, that impossible, heartbreaking moment, would ignite a war against the most powerful man in Montana Territory and prove that sometimes the smallest voices carry enough strength to resurrect dead hearts and topple corrupt empires. Before we begin this journey together, I invite you to stay until the very end, because this story will take you places you never expected. And when you're done, please comment below with the city you're watching from. I'd love to see how far Hope's story travels across this world. The creek ran black that morning, choked with ice that hadn't fully formed and wouldn't fully thaw until April. Jonah McCord stood knee-deep in water so cold it felt like knives against his legs, his breath coming out in ragged clouds that disappeared into the gray Montana sky. He'd come down to the creek to check his traps, not because he needed the pelts, but because the routine kept him from thinking too much about the silence that filled his cabin like a living thing. The burlap sack caught his eye because it moved wrong. Everything in the creek moved with the current, but this thing tumbled against it, as if whatever was inside was fighting. Jonah's first thought was that some rancher upstream had drowned a litter of puppies, which happened more often than people like to admit when times were hard. His second thought was that he should probably just let it pass. Whatever was in that sack was already dead or dying, and Jonah McCord had made peace with death a long time ago. But his hands reached for it anyway. The burlap was rough and wet and heavier than it should have been. Jonah hauled it onto the bank, his shoulders protesting the movement. At 42, he wasn't old, but 8 years of living alone in the wilderness had a way of settling into a man's bones. He set the sack down on the frozen earth and pulled his hunting knife from his belt. The burlap split easily under the blade. What tumbled out wasn't a puppy. Jesus Christ, Jonah breathed, and those were the first words he'd spoken aloud in 3 days. The baby was blue. Not the pink-tinged blue of cold skin, but the deep, terrible blue of a body that had stopped fighting for warmth. She wore a thin cotton gown that might have been white once, but was now the color of creek water. Her lips were purple. Her eyes were closed. Jonah's first instinct was to look away, to let the creek take back what it had given him, because he knew what it meant to hold something precious and watch it die. But then her eyes opened. They were gray, the color of storm clouds or gunmetal or the mountains in winter. They fixed on Jonah's face with an intensity that didn't belong in something so small and so close to death. Her mouth opened. No sound came out at first, just a tiny cloud of breath that proved she was still fighting. Then she whispered it. "Mama." The word hit Jonah like a bullet to the chest. His hands moved before his mind could catch up, stripping off his heavy wool coat and wrapping the baby in it, pulling her against his chest where his heart was hammering so hard he thought it might break through his ribs. She was so cold. God, she was so cold it didn't seem possible that anything living could survive it. "I've got you," Jonah heard himself say. "I've got you, little one. Stay with me now." He ran. Jonah McCord hadn't run in 8 years, not since the day he'd buried his wife and son and sworn he was done with the world. But he ran now. His boots slipped on the icy ground. His lungs burned in the frozen air. The baby made small sounds against his chest, sounds that weren't quite cries but weren't quite silence either, and Jonah ran faster. The town of Ironwood sat 2 miles from his cabin, nestled in a valley where the creek widened into something almost peaceful. It was the kind of town that appeared in Montana Territory like mushrooms after rain, a collection of buildings thrown up fast and meant to last just long enough to extract whatever wealth the land was willing to give. There was a general store, a saloon, a church, a schoolhouse, and about 200 people who mostly kept their business to themselves. Jonah hadn't been to town in 6 weeks. He burst through the door of the schoolhouse because it was closest and because he could see smoke rising from its chimney. The warmth hit him like a wall. 20 small faces turned toward him, eyes wide with surprise. At the front of the room, a woman with dark hair pinned in a neat bun looked up from the chalkboard where she'd been writing something about arithmetic. "Mr. McCord?" Her voice carried the same surprise as the children's faces. Marin Doyle had been Ironwood's school teacher for 3 years, and in all that time Jonah had never once set foot in her classroom. "I need help," Jonah said, and his voice came out rough, almost broken. "I found her in the creek. She's freezing. I don't know what to do." Marin Doyle didn't hesitate. She crossed the room in 4 quick steps, her skirts rustling, and pulled back the edge of Jonah's coat. Her face went pale when she saw the baby's blue skin. "Children," she said, her voice suddenly sharp with authority. "You're dismissed for the day. Go straight home. Tommy, run and fetch Dr. Brennan. Tell him it's an emergency. Run fast." The children scattered like birds. Marin grabbed Jonah's arm and steered him toward the small room at the back of the schoolhouse where she kept her living quarters. It wasn't much. A narrow bed, a washstand, a wood stove that was already burning warm. She pulled blankets from a trunk and spread them on the bed. "Put her here," Marin instructed. "We need to get her warm, but not too fast. Gentle heat. Do you understand? Too fast and will shock her system." Jonah laid the baby down as if she were made of glass. Marin's hands moved with practiced efficiency, unwrapping the wet gown, checking the baby's breathing, her pulse, the color of her fingernails. Her face gave nothing away, but Jonah could see the tension in her shoulders. "How long was she in the water?" Marin asked. "I don't know. I found her maybe 10 minutes ago." "Was she conscious when you pulled her out?" "Barely. Jonah stopped, the memory catching in his throat. "She said, 'Mama.'" Marin's hands stilled for just a moment. Then she continued her work, rubbing the baby's limbs gently to encourage circulation. "She's hypothermic, severely. But she's breathing, and her heart is beating. That's something." "Will she live?" Marin looked up at him then, and Jonah saw something in her eyes he recognized, the same thing he saw in his own reflection on the rare occasions he looked in a mirror. Loss. The kind that never quite healed. "I don't know," she said honestly, "but we're going to fight like hell to make sure she does." The doctor arrived 20 minutes later, breathing hard from the run. Dr. Samuel Brennan was a man in his 60s who'd seen everything Montana Territory had to throw at him and had somehow managed to keep his sense of humor. He took one look at the baby, and his humor disappeared. "Burlap sack, you said?" He pulled out his stethoscope and listened to the baby's chest. "Someone meant for her to drown." The words hung in the air like smoke. Jonah felt something cold settle in his gut, colder even than the creek water. "Who would do that?" Marin whispered. "Who would try to murder a baby?" "Someone who wanted to hide something," Dr. Brennan said grimly. He continued his examination, his weathered hands surprisingly gentle. "She's maybe 3, 4 months old, well-fed, or she was until recently. This isn't a child born to poverty." "Can you save her?" Jonah asked. "Maybe. Keep her warm, get some warm milk into her if she'll take it. Watch her breathing. If it gets shallow or stops, you call for me immediately." Dr. Brennan packed up his bag and stood. "I'll be back in 2 hours to check on her. In the meantime, we need to figure out who she belongs to." "She doesn't belong to anyone who threw her in a creek to die," Jonah said, and there was something in his voice that made both Marin and the doctor look at him sharply. "That's not how the law works, McCord," Dr. Brennan said quietly. "We need to find her people. Her people tried to kill her. We don't know that for certain. Could have been a desperate mother, could have been—" "It was murder," Jonah interrupted. "Someone tied that sack shut. Someone threw her in the creek when it was cold enough to kill her in minutes. That's not desperation. That's intent." Dr. Brennan sighed. "I'll talk to Sheriff Monroe. But until we know more, you two are responsible for keeping her alive. Can you do that?" Marin looked at Jonah. Jonah looked at the baby, whose color was slowly, so slowly, starting to shift from blue to pale pink. Her eyes had closed again, and her breathing had steadied into something that almost resembled normal sleep. "Yes," Marin said. "We can do that." The doctor left. The schoolhouse fell quiet except for the crackle of the wood stove and the baby's soft breathing. Jonah stood awkwardly by the bed, suddenly aware that he was dripping creek water all over Marin's floor. "You should get out of those wet clothes," Marin said without looking at him. She was focused on the baby, one hand resting lightly on the small chest to monitor breathing. "There's a blanket in the trunk. You can change in the schoolroom." "I'm fine." "You'll catch pneumonia, and then you'll be no use to anyone. Go." Jonah went. He changed into dry clothes from the trunk. Probably belonged to Marin's late husband, he thought, though he didn't ask. When he returned to the small room, Marin had managed to get a few drops of warm milk into the baby's mouth, using a clean cloth. "She's swallowing," Marin said, and there was cautious hope in her voice. "That's good. That's very good." They worked in silence for the next hour, taking turns trying to get more milk into the baby, keeping watch over her breathing, adding wood to the stove when the room temperature dropped even slightly. It was intimate work, the kind that required trust and coordination, and Jonah found himself falling into a rhythm with Marin Doyle, as if they'd been doing this for years instead of minutes. "Why did you come back to town?" Marin asked suddenly. "I heard you'd sworn off civilization." "I had," Jonah said. "I did. But I couldn't just leave her." "Because she called you Mama?" "Because she deserved a chance." Marin was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Your wife and son, the fever, 3 years ago, wasn't it?" 8. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to." "It's fine." Jonah cut her off, not unkindly. "What about you? I heard you were widowed." 2 years this spring, Thomas fell from a horse, broke his neck." Marin's voice was steady, but her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the blanket around the baby. "We'd been married 6 months. I thought we'd have decades. I thought we'd have children." "Life doesn't ask what we want." "No," Marin agreed. "It doesn't." They fell silent again. The baby slept. The stove burned. Outside, the Montana sky grew darker as afternoon slid toward evening. When Dr. Brennan returned 2 hours later, he brought Sheriff Monroe with him. The sheriff was a lean man with gray whiskers and eyes that had seen too much to be surprised by anything. He took off his hat when he entered Marin's quarters and studied the baby with an expression Jonah couldn't quite read. "Dr. Brennan tells me you pulled her from the creek," Sheriff Monroe said to Jonah. "Tell me exactly what happened." Jonah recounted the morning, the sack in the water, the burlap tied shut, the baby's blue skin and whispered word. The sheriff listened without interrupting, his face growing grimmer with each detail. "And you have no idea who she might belong to?" the sheriff asked. "None," Jonah said, "but Dr. Brennan said she was well fed. That means she came from a family with means. Or a family that had means until they decided they didn't want her anymore," Sheriff Monroe said darkly. He turned to Dr. Brennan. "You think she'll make it?" "She's got a fighting chance now, but she needs constant care for the next few days, maybe longer." The sheriff looked at Marin. "You willing to take that on, Miss Doyle?" "Mrs. Doyle," Marin corrected automatically. "And yes, I'm willing." "I'll help," Jonah added. Sheriff Monroe raised an eyebrow. "You, the hermit of Ironwood Creek? You're volunteering to help care for a baby?" "I'm the one who found her. I'm not walking away now." The sheriff studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "All right, here's what we're going to do. I'll put the word out, discreetly, that we found a baby. See if anyone comes forward. In the meantime, Mrs. Doyle and Mr. McCord, you keep her alive and safe. Don't trust anyone. Don't tell anyone where she is unless I say so. Understood?" "Why the secrecy?" Marin asked. "Because someone tried to murder this child," Sheriff Monroe said bluntly. "And until I know who and why, everyone in this town is a suspect." He left. Dr. Brennan stayed long enough to check the baby one more time, pronounced her stable, and departed with instructions to send for him if anything changed. Then it was just Jonah and Marin and the baby again. "You don't have to stay," Marin said quietly. "I can manage on my own." "I know you can," Jonah replied, "but I'm staying anyway." Something passed between them then, an understanding, perhaps, or a recognition. They were both broken people who'd chosen isolation over connection, safety over risk. But this baby, this tiny scrap of life that had somehow survived the impossible, had pulled them back into the world whether they liked it or not. "We should give her a name," Marin said. "We can't just keep calling her the baby." "What would you call her?" Marin looked down at the small face, peaceful now in sleep. "Hope," she said softly. "Because that's what she is. Hope that we thought was lost forever." Jonah tested the name in his mind, felt how it sat on his tongue. "Hope," he agreed. "Yeah, That fits. That night, they took turns keeping watch. Jonah sat in the chair by the bed while Maren slept fitfully on a pallet on the floor. Every hour, he checked Hope's breathing, her color, her temperature. She slept deeply, making small sounds that might have been dreams or might have been the echo of whatever horror she'd survived. Around midnight, she woke crying. Jonah picked her up awkwardly, holding her the way he'd once held his own son. A lifetime ago, it seemed now. Hope's cries were weak and desperate, the sound of a child who'd learned that no one comes when you call. "Shh," Jonah whispered, rocking her gently. "You're safe now. I promise you're safe." Maren stirred on her pallet. "What does she need?" "I don't know. Milk, maybe, or just comfort." Maren rose and prepared more warm milk, and together they coaxed Hope into swallowing a few precious drops. The baby's cries faded into whimpers, then into silence. She grabbed Jonah's finger with her tiny fist and held on as if her life depended on it. "She trusts you," Maren observed. "She shouldn't. I don't know what I'm doing." "None of us do. We just try our best and hope it's enough." Hope fell back asleep, still clutching Jonah's finger. He couldn't bring himself to pull away, so he stayed there, bent over the bed, his back aching and his heart doing something it hadn't done in 8 years. It was opening. The next 3 days passed in a blur of feeding, changing, watching, and worrying. Hope grew stronger hour by hour, her color returning to a healthy pink, her cries gaining strength and conviction. Dr. Brennan visited twice daily and declared himself cautiously optimistic. Sheriff Monroe came and went, his expression growing darker each time. "Any leads?" Jonah asked on the third day. "Nothing concrete," the sheriff admitted, "but I'm hearing whispers. People are nervous. Someone knows something." "Then make them talk." "It's not that simple, McCord. This town runs on certain understandings. There are people here who don't like questions, and they have ways of making sure those questions don't get answered." "What people?" Sheriff Monroe hesitated. "I need more proof before I can say. But if I'm right about who's involved..." He shook his head. "Just keep that baby safe, and keep your eyes open." He left before Jonah could press for more information. It was Maren who first noticed they were being watched. "There's a man across the street," she said on the fourth day, peering through the schoolhouse window. "He's been standing there for over an hour." Jonah looked. The man was well-dressed in a dark suit, his face shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. He made no attempt to hide his surveillance. "You recognize him?" Jonah asked. "No, but he doesn't look like a rancher or a miner. He looks like someone who works for someone important," Jonah finished. That night, the man was joined by another. They stood in the shadows across from the schoolhouse, silent sentinels who made no move to approach, but whose presence was message enough. Someone knew where Hope was, and someone was keeping watch. Jonah slept with his old Colt revolver under his pillow. On the 5th day, the watchers disappeared. Jonah didn't find this reassuring. He'd been a ranger long enough to know that when your enemies stopped watching, it usually meant they were preparing to act. Hope was thriving now. She smiled when Maren sang to her. She gurgled with delight when Jonah made faces. She was beginning to look like a normal, healthy baby, which made it even harder to imagine someone had tried to kill her. "I've been thinking," Maren said that evening as they sat together by the stove. Hope was asleep between them, swaddled in clean blankets. "What happens when the sheriff figures out who she belongs to?" "We don't give her back," Jonah said immediately. "It might not be that simple. If she has family, her family tried to drown her. We don't know that for certain. Maybe it was a servant. Maybe it was..." "Maren," Jonah's voice was gentle but firm. "Look at her. Really look at her. That's not a child anyone threw away by accident. Someone made a choice. And I'll be damned if I let them have a second chance to finish what they started." Maren was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "I've been thinking the same thing. But what if they come for her legally? What if they have more power than we do? Then we'll fight. We might lose. We might, but at least we'll have tried." Maren reached out and took his hand. It was the first time they'd touched deliberately, and Jonah felt the contact like electricity. Her palm was warm and rough from chalk dust. Her grip was strong. "I'm scared," she admitted. I'm scared of losing her. I'm scared of caring about something again. But I can't seem to help it. I know, Jonah said. Me too. They sat like that for a long time, hands clasped, watching Hope sleep, while outside the Montana night grew cold and still. The knock came at midnight. Jonah was awake instantly, gun in hand. Maren sat up on her pallet, eyes wide in the darkness. Hope slept on, oblivious. Mrs. Doyle, a woman's voice hushed and urgent. Please, I need to speak with you. It's about the baby. Jonah moved to the door, positioning himself between it and the bed where Hope slept. Who are you? My name is Clara. I work at the Blackthorn estate. Please, I don't have much time. They'll know I'm gone. Jonah and Maren exchanged a look. The Blackthorn estate. Judge Silas Blackthorn was the most powerful man in Ironwood, maybe in all of Montana territory. He owned half the land, controlled the mining operations, and had connections that reached all the way to the territorial governor. Jonah opened the door a crack. The woman on the other side was small and middle-aged, wearing a simple house dress and a shawl. Her eyes were frightened but determined. What do you know about the baby? Maren asked. I know who she belongs to, Clara whispered, and I know why they tried to kill her, but if I tell you, you have to promise me something. You have to promise you'll keep her safe. You have to promise you won't let them take her back. Jonah opened the door wider. Come in. Tell us everything. Clara stepped inside, glancing nervously over her shoulder before Jonah closed the door. In the lamplight, he could see she'd been crying. The baby's name is Hope Blackthorn, Clara said. She's Judge Blackthorn's granddaughter. Her mother is Lydia Blackthorn, the judge's only daughter. Maren's hand flew to her mouth. But Lydia isn't married. No, she isn't, Clara confirmed. The father was a man named Mateo Cruz. He worked for the judge as a foreman. They fell in love. Lydia got pregnant. The judge was furious. What happened to Mateo? Jonah asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. The judge had him beaten and driven out of town. He told Lydia that Mateo had abandoned her, that he'd taken money and run. She believed him. She was heartbroken. When the baby was born, the judge told Lydia the child was stillborn. The room went very quiet. He told her the baby was dead? Maren's voice shook with fury. And then he ordered it, Clara said. He ordered one of his men to take the baby and drown her in the creek. He said she was a stain on the family name. He said she had to disappear. Then how did she survive? Jonah demanded. The man the judge hired got drunk before he could finish the job. He tied the sack but didn't weight it down properly. The current carried her downstream instead of pulling her under. He was supposed to make sure she died, but he was too drunk to do it right. Clara's voice broke. I've been watching Lydia grieve for a baby who isn't dead. I've watched the judge lie to his own daughter. I couldn't stand it anymore. When I heard you'd found a baby in the creek, I knew. I just knew. Does Lydia know her daughter is alive? Maren asked. No, and the judge can't let her find out. If she knew what he'd done… Clara shook her head. He'll come for the baby. He'll use the law. He'll say she belongs to him as next of kin. And once he has her, he'll finish what he started. Like hell he will, Jonah growled. Clara looked at him with desperate hope. You'll protect her? You swear it? With my life, Jonah said, and he meant it. Maren stepped forward. Clara, will you testify to what you've told us? Will you tell the sheriff? I can't. The judge owns the sheriff. He owns everyone. If I speak up, I'll be fired at best and dead at worst. Clara backed toward the door. I've told you what I know. That's all I can do. The rest is up to you. She slipped out into the night before either of them could stop her. Jonah locked the door behind her and turned to find Maren standing by the bed, staring down at Hope with an expression of fierce protectiveness. What do we do? Maren asked. We get ready for a fight, Jonah said, because Blackthorn isn't going to let this go. He'll come for her, and when he does, we need to be ready. How do we fight a man who owns the law? We find a way. We have to. Hope stirred in her sleep, her small fist opening and closing as if reaching for something. Maren picked her up and held her close, and Jonah saw tears streaming down her face. I can't lose her, Maren whispered. I know I've only known her for 5 days, but I can't lose her. Not again. Not after Thomas. Not after everything. Jonah crossed the room and wrapped his arms around both of them, around Marin and Hope, this fragile little family that had formed in the space between one heartbeat and the next. He felt Marin lean into him, felt Hope's warmth against his chest, and something inside him that had been frozen for 8 years finally, fully thawed. "You won't lose her," he promised. "We won't let that happen. Whatever it takes." Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows. The creek ran black and cold under the Montana stars. And somewhere in the darkness, Judge Silas Blackthorne was probably already planning his next move. But Jonah McCord had been a Texas Ranger. He'd tracked killers through deserts and mountains. He'd stared down men who thought they were above the law and proved them wrong. He'd lost everything once and survived it. He wasn't about to lose this child. Not to Blackthorne. Not to anyone. The war was coming. And this time, Jonah McCord wasn't running away. He was standing his ground. The first blow came 3 days later, wrapped in legal paper and delivered by a man in an expensive suit who introduced himself as Arthur Pemberton, attorney at law. Jonah answered the door to find Pemberton standing on the schoolhouse steps with 2 deputies flanking him like bookends. The lawyer's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Mr. McCord, I presume. I'm here on behalf of Judge Silas Blackthorne regarding the matter of a certain infant currently in your care." Jonah didn't move from the doorway. "Don't know what you're talking about. Please don't insult my intelligence. The entire town knows you pulled a baby from the creek. Judge Blackthorne has reason to believe that child belongs to his family, and he's prepared to assert his legal rights as her grandfather and nearest living relative." "Her mother's alive," Jonah said flatly. "That makes her the nearest living relative." Pemberton's smile widened. "Miss Blackthorne is unmarried and therefore under her father's legal authority. Furthermore, she's currently under a doctor's care for severe melancholia following the traumatic loss of her child. She's in no condition to make decisions regarding an infant, even if this one were proven to be hers, which it hasn't been." Behind Jonah, Marin appeared with Hope in her arms. The baby was wearing a clean white gown Marin had sewn from her own petticoat, and her gray eyes were alert and curious. She looked nothing like the half-dead creature Jonah had pulled from the creek. Pemberton's gaze fixed on Hope with the cold calculation of a man appraising property. "That's her. I'd recognize those eyes anywhere. Blackthorne eyes. They run in the family." "You can't have her," Marin said, her voice steady despite the way her hands trembled. "She's under our care, and she's thriving. Moving her now would be dangerous. Doctor, Brennan can examine her at the Blackthorne estate just as easily as here. Judge Blackthorne has prepared a nursery with everything a child could need. He's willing to overlook the irregularity of his daughter's situation and raise the child as his ward." "How generous of him," Jonah said, not bothering to hide his contempt. "Considering he's the one who ordered her drowned in the first place." The smile vanished from Pemberton's face. "That's a serious accusation, Mr. McCord. One I'd advise you to reconsider making without substantial proof. Slander against a man of Judge Blackthorne's standing could have severe legal consequences." "Is that a threat?" "It's a statement of fact." Pemberton pulled a document from his leather case. "This is a court order signed by Judge Blackthorne himself, granting him temporary custody of the infant known as Hope, surname unknown, until such time as her parentage can be legally established. You have 24 hours to comply. If you refuse, these deputies will remove the child by force, and you'll both be charged with kidnapping." He thrust the paper at Jonah and turned on his heel, his expensive boots clicking against the wooden steps. The deputies followed, but one of them, a younger man with kind eyes, glanced back apologetically before climbing onto his horse. Jonah closed the door and read the court order twice. It was legally airtight. Blackthorne had covered every angle. "What do we do?" Marin asked. Hope had started to fuss, sensing the tension in the room. Marin rocked her gently, humming the lullaby she'd sung every night for the past week. "We fight," Jonah said. "But we need help. Someone Blackthorne doesn't own." "Who?" "He owns the sheriff, the mayor, half the businessmen in town. Even Dr. Brennan won't testify against him. I asked." Jonah thought for a moment. "What about the territorial marshal? Blackthorne's influence doesn't reach that far." The nearest marshal is in Helena. That's 3 days' ride, and we don't have 3 days. Then we make him come to us. Jonah grabbed his coat. I'm going to send a telegram. You stay here with Hope, lock the door, and don't open it for anyone except me or Dr. Brennan. Jonah, Marin caught his arm. Be careful. If Blackthorn knows we're trying to go over his head, he'll do what? Try to kill us like he tried to kill her? Jonah looked down at Hope, who'd stopped fussing and was now staring at him with those storm cloud eyes. Something fierce and protective surged through his chest. Let him try. The telegraph office was run by a nervous man named Willis, who stuttered when he was anxious. He was stuttering badly when Jonah walked in. Mr. McCord, I heard about this court order. Terrible business, just terrible. I need to send a telegram to the territorial marshal in Helena. It's urgent. Willis's face went pale. I can't do that. Can't or won't. Judge Blackthorn was here this morning. He said anyone who helps you or Mrs. Doyle will lose their business license. I can't afford to lose this office. I've got a wife and 3 children. Jonah pulled out a gold coin, one of the last from his ranger days, and set it on the counter. Double your usual rate. Send the telegram, and I'll make sure Blackthorn never knows it came from here. Willis stared at the coin, then at Jonah, then at the coin again. His hand trembled as he picked it up. What do you want it to say? Jonah dictated the message carefully, outlining the situation and requesting immediate assistance. Willis's fingers flew over the telegraph key, tapping out the words in rapid-fire code. When he finished, he looked up with resignation in his eyes. It's sent. But Mr. McCord, you should know, the marshal's office in Helena is understaffed. Even if they get this, even if they care, it'll be days before anyone arrives. Maybe a week. Then we hold out for a week. Against Judge Blackthorn? With what army? With whatever I've got, Jonah said, and walked out before Willis could argue. On his way back to the schoolhouse, Jonah noticed the town had changed. People who used to nod in greeting now crossed the street to avoid him. Shopkeepers who'd known him for years suddenly found reasons to close their doors. The message was clear. Blackthorn had drawn a line, and anyone who stood with Jonah and Marin would find themselves on the wrong side of it. But not everyone was willing to bend. Old Samuel Pierce, who ran the general store, was waiting outside the schoolhouse when Jonah returned. He was a grizzled man in his 70s who'd come west during the gold rush and stayed when the gold ran out. Heard about the court order, Samuel said without preamble. Heard about a lot of things, actually. Clara Thompson's been talking to folks she trusts. Quietly. Very quietly. Clara's taking a hell of a risk. She knows it. So do the rest of us. Samuel handed Jonah a canvas bag. Supplies. Enough food for 2 weeks, plus some other things you might need. Medicine, ammunition, a few items that might come in handy if things get ugly. Jonah looked inside the bag and felt his throat tighten. There were tins of milk powder, jars of preserved fruit, bandages, laudanum, and a box of 45 cartridges for his Colt. Sam, I can't pay for all this. Don't insult me. That baby deserves better than what Blackthorn's planning for her. We all know what he is, even if we're too scared to say it out loud. Samuel's weathered face hardened. But there are a few of us who remember what it means to stand up for what's right. You're not alone in this fight, McCord. You just can't see the rest of your army yet. The old man left before Jonah could thank him properly. Jonah carried the supplies inside where Marin was pacing with Hope, who'd finally fallen asleep against her shoulder. What did you find out? Marin whispered. Telegraph the marshal. Help's coming, but it'll take time we don't have. In the meantime, we've got at least one ally. He showed her the supplies. Maybe more. That night, they didn't sleep. They took turns keeping watch at the window, waiting for Blackthorn's next move. It came at dawn. A carriage pulled up in front of the schoolhouse. Black lacquer with gilt trim, pulled by matched horses that probably cost more than most Ironwood families earned in a year. The man who stepped out wore a judge's robes despite the early hour, as if he'd dressed specifically to remind everyone of his authority. Judge Silas Blackthorn was 60 years old and built like a bull, with iron-gray hair and eyes the same color as Hope's. He radiated power the way a furnace radiates heat, constant, overwhelming, impossible to ignore. He didn't bother knocking. He simply stood in front of the door and spoke in a voice that carried through the thin walls. "Mrs. Doyle, Mr. McCord, I know you're in there. I've come to collect my granddaughter. You have 10 minutes to bring her out peacefully, or I'll have my men break down this door and take her by force. The choice is yours." Jonah looked at Marin. She was holding Hope so tightly he worried she might hurt the baby, but Hope was awake and calm, staring up at Marin's face as if trying to memorize it. "We can't give her to him," Marin said. "We can't." "We won't." Jonah checked his Colt, made sure it was loaded. "But we need to be smart about this. If we fight now, we'll lose. We need time." "Time for what?" "Time to find proof. Time for the marshal to arrive. Time to turn this town against him." Jonah moved to the window and called out, "We need to talk, Blackthorn. Face to face. No deputies, no lawyers, just you and me." There was a pause. Then, "You're in no position to make demands, McCord." "I'm in a position to make this very public and very ugly. Your choice." Another pause, longer this time. Then the carriage door opened and Blackthorn climbed out alone. Jonah unlocked the door and stepped outside, closing it firmly behind him. Up close, Blackthorn was even more imposing. He stood a full head taller than Jonah, and his hands were scarred from years of ranch work before he'd turned to law and politics. He smiled, but it was the smile of a man who'd never lost a fight and didn't intend to start now. "You've got courage, I'll give you that," Blackthorn said. "Stupid courage, but courage nonetheless." "I know what you did," Jonah said quietly. "I know you ordered that baby killed. I know you lied to your daughter, and I know you're planning to finish the job the moment you get Hope back. You know nothing. You have suspicions and hearsay, neither of which will hold up in any court, especially my court." Blackthorn's smile widened. "But let's say, hypothetically, that your wild accusations were true. Let's say I did decide that my daughter's bastard child was better off dead than alive to shame my family name. What could you possibly do about it? I could make sure everyone in Montana Territory knows exactly what kind of man you are. They already know what kind of man I am. I'm the man who built this town. I'm the man who brought law and order to this territory. I'm the man who decides who prospers and who doesn't." Blackthorn leaned in close enough that Jonah could smell expensive tobacco on his breath. "You're a washed-up ranger who ran away from civilization after his family died. You've got no money, no influence, no friends. You're nothing. And if you don't hand over that baby in the next 5 minutes, I'll make sure you end up in a grave right next to the wife and son you couldn't save." Jonah's fist connected with Blackthorn's jaw before he'd consciously decided to throw the punch. The judge staggered back, more surprised than hurt, and for a moment genuine fury flashed in his eyes. Then he laughed. "There it is, the famous McCord temper. They said you lost it after the fever took your family. Looks like you found it again." Blackthorn touched his jaw, checking for blood. "That'll cost you. Assaulting a judge, that's 5 years in territorial prison. By the time you get out, that baby will be old enough to forget you ever existed. You'll have to catch me first." "Oh, I will. And when I do, I'll make sure you watch while I take that child somewhere far away where no one will ever find her. Then I'll make sure you spend the rest of your miserable life knowing you failed her the same way you failed your own son." The door burst open behind them. Marin stood there with Hope in her arms, her face white with fury. "How dare you?" she said, her voice shaking. "How dare you speak to him that way? And how dare you stand there and threaten an innocent child's life as if she's nothing more than an inconvenience to be disposed of?" Blackthorn's expression changed when he saw Hope. For just a moment, something almost human flickered in his eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or regret. Then it was gone, replaced by cold calculation. "Give her to me, Mrs. Doyle. I'm her grandfather. Whatever you think of me, I have a legal right to her care." "You have no rights," Marin shot back. "Not to her, not after what you've done. What I've done is build an empire in this godforsaken wilderness. What I've done is create opportunities for hundreds of families. What I've done is maintain order and civilization in a place that would otherwise descend into chaos. And what I'm doing now is preventing a scandal that would destroy my daughter and disgrace my family name." "Your daughter thinks her baby is dead," Jonah said. "You could give her back. You could tell Lydia the truth. You could let them be a family." My daughter is weak. She always has been. She fell in love with a Mexican foreman who was after my money and my land. She let herself be seduced and shamed. If I let her keep that bastard child, she'd be ruined. No decent man would ever marry her. She'd spend the rest of her life as a social outcast, raising a half-breed baby that would never be accepted anywhere that matters. The slur hit Jonah like a physical blow. He'd heard men talk like that before. Hell, he'd worked with rangers who thought the same way. But hearing it directed at Hope, at this tiny, innocent child who'd done nothing except survive, made his blood boil. "Get off this property," Jonah said quietly. "Right now. Before I do something we'll both regret." Blackthorn studied him for a long moment. Then he smiled again, slow and satisfied. 24 hours, McCord. That's what the court order says. After that, I'm coming back with enough men to take her by force. You can die defending her if you want, but the end result will be the same. She'll be mine, and you'll be nothing but a memory. He climbed back into his carriage and rolled away, leaving Jonah and Marin standing in the morning light with Hope between them. "We need to run," Marin said. "We need to take her and disappear before he comes back." "Where would we go? He owns half the territory. He's got connections everywhere. We wouldn't make it 50 miles before he tracked us down." "Then what do we do?" Jonah looked at Hope, who was starting to fuss again, and felt that same fierce protectiveness surge through him. "We do what Clara suggested. We find allies, we build a case, and we make damn sure that when Blackthorn comes back tomorrow, he's walking into a fight he can't win." They spent the rest of the day preparing for war. Jonah cleaned his guns and checked his ammunition. Marin reinforced the doors and windows, barricading them with furniture. Dr. Brennan stopped by with more medical supplies and a warning. "Blackthorn's offering money to anyone who will testify against you," the doctor said grimly. "Says you kidnapped the baby. Says you're planning to ransom her. He's turning the whole town against you." "Will you testify?" Jonah asked. "Will you tell the truth about what happened?" Dr. Brennan looked at Hope, then at his own weathered hands. "I'm sorry. I've got a practice to maintain, patients who depend on me. If I speak against Blackthorn, he'll run me out of town. I'll lose everything." "We're about to lose a child's life." "I know. And I'll carry that guilt to my grave. But I can't help you. I'm sorry." He left. Marin watched him go with tears in her eyes. "Everyone's afraid of him," she whispered. "Everyone." But she was wrong. That evening, as darkness fell over Ironwood, people began arriving at the schoolhouse. They came alone or in pairs, moving quietly through the shadows. Samuel Pierce came first, bringing his hunting rifle. Then came Martha Chen, who ran the boarding house, carrying her late husband's shotgun. Willis from the telegraph office arrived with his hands shaking but his jaw set. Even young Tommy, the boy who'd run to fetch Dr. Brennan that first day, showed up with a slingshot and a pocketful of stones. "My ma says what Judge Blackthorn's doing is wrong," Tommy announced. "She says sometimes you gotta stand up to bullies even when you're scared. So here I am." By midnight, there were 15 people in and around the schoolhouse, armed with whatever weapons they could find. They weren't soldiers, they weren't gunfighters. They were shopkeepers and farmers and housewives who'd decided that enough was enough. Jonah stood in front of them, feeling the weight of their trust like a physical thing. "I won't lie to you," he said. "Tomorrow, when Blackthorn comes, it's going to get ugly. He'll have deputies and hired guns. He'll have the law on his side. Some of you might get hurt. Some of you might lose your businesses or your homes. But if we stand together, if we make enough noise, maybe, just maybe, we can force him to back down." "What if he doesn't?" Martha Chen asked. "What if he comes in shooting?" "Then we shoot back," Samuel Pierce said flatly. "I didn't survive 40 years in Montana Territory by backing down from bullies. I'm not about to start now." The others murmured agreement. Jonah felt something unfamiliar stirring in his chest. Hope, maybe, or something close to it. But hope, he'd learned, was a dangerous thing. The attack came 2 hours before dawn, when they were all exhausted and their guard was down. Not from the front where they'd been watching, but from behind, through the schoolhouse's back window, which Jonah had reinforced but not quite well enough. The glass shattered. Smoke poured in, thick, acrid smoke from some kind of chemical fire. People started coughing, choking, stumbling toward the exits. In the chaos, Jonah lost sight of Marin and Hope. "Marin!" he shouted, but his voice was lost in the confusion. Then he saw her, pressed against the far wall with Hope clutched to her chest, surrounded by three men in dark coats. One of them, a huge brute with a scarred face, was reaching for the baby. Jonah's Colt was in his hand before he'd consciously decided to draw. "Touch her and die." The brute laughed. "Big talk for a man who's outnumbered and outgunned." "I only need one bullet," Jonah said calmly. "Guess who it's reserved for?" They stared at each other across the smoke-filled room. Jonah could hear people coughing outside, hear Samuel Pierce shouting orders, hear Hope starting to cry. But all he could see was that man's hand, inches from Hope's blanket. Then someone grabbed him from behind, someone strong enough to pin his arms and knock the gun from his grip. Jonah fought, using every dirty trick he'd learned in 20 years of law enforcement, but there were too many of them. They dragged him toward the door, and he saw Marin screaming, saw the brute lifting Hope from her arms. "No!" Marin lunged forward, clawing at the man's face. He backhanded her casually, and she went down hard. Something inside Jonah broke. He'd felt this way once before 8 years ago, holding his son's fevered body and knowing there was nothing he could do to save him. That helpless, desperate rage that came from watching someone you loved slip away while you stood by, useless. But this time he wasn't useless. Jonah drove his head backward into his captor's face, felt the satisfying crunch of a broken nose. The man's grip loosened just enough. Jonah spun, drove his elbow into the man's throat, and dropped him choking to the floor. Then he dove for his fallen Colt. The brute with Hope was halfway to the broken window. Jonah fired. The bullet caught the man in the shoulder, spinning him around. Hope tumbled from his arms, and Marin was there, catching her, rolling away from the danger. The brute roared in pain and fury, reaching for his own weapon. Jonah fired again. This time he didn't miss anything vital. The other attackers scattered. Gunfire erupted from outside as Samuel and the others realized what was happening. Someone was screaming. The smoke was so thick now that Jonah could barely see, but he could hear Hope crying, and that was enough. He stumbled through the chaos to where Marin crouched against the wall, found them both alive, and pulled them toward the front door. They burst out into the pre-dawn air, gasping and coughing. The schoolhouse was on fire now, flames licking up the back wall where the smoke bombs had been thrown. The rest of their makeshift army was scattered across the street, facing down a dozen of Blackthorn's men. Sheriff Monroe was there too, looking torn and miserable. "McCord," the sheriff called out, "don't make this worse. Give up the baby. Nobody else has to get hurt." "One man's already dead," Jonah shouted back. "He died trying to kidnap a child. You really want to arrest me for defending her?" "I don't want to arrest anyone, but Judge Blackthorn has a legal claim. Blackthorn tried to murder her." Marin's voice rang out clear and strong despite the smoke damage. "He ordered her drowned because she's illegitimate. He lied to his own daughter, and now he's burning down a schoolhouse and attacking innocent people to cover up his crimes. Is that the man you want to serve, Sheriff? Is that the law you believe in?" The sheriff's face twisted with conflict. Around him, his deputies shifted uncomfortably. These were men who'd known Ironwood's citizens for years, who'd shared drinks with Samuel Pierce and bought supplies from Martha Chen. They were being asked to attack their neighbors on behalf of a man they feared but didn't respect. "I believe in order," Sheriff Monroe said finally, "and right now, you're disrupting that order." "Then restore it," a new voice called out, "by arresting the real criminal." Everyone turned. A woman stood at the edge of the crowd, wrapped in a shawl despite the growing heat from the burning building. She was young, maybe 25, with dark hair and eyes the color of storm clouds. Blackthorn's eyes. "Lydia," Sheriff Monroe breathed. Lydia Blackthorn walked forward with her chin held high and tears streaming down her face. When she saw Hope in Marin's arms, she stopped as if she'd hit a wall. "That's my daughter," she whispered. "That's my baby. I'd know her anywhere." The crowd went silent. Even the crackling flames seemed to quiet. Lydia took another step forward, her hands trembling. "My father told me she was dead," Lydia said, her voice growing stronger with each word. "He said she was born too early, that she didn't survive. He let me grieve. He let me wish I'd died instead. And all this time she was alive. All this time he knew." "Miss Blackthorn," Sheriff Monroe began, "your father said you were ill." "I was ill with grief. Grief over a child who wasn't dead, Lydia's voice cracked. Clara told me everything, about the creek, about the drowning attempt, about these good people who saved my daughter's life while my father tried to end it. She turned to face Marin, and something passed between the two women, an understanding that transcended words. Both mothers, both wounded, both willing to die for the child between them. May I? Lydia asked softly. May I hold her? Marin looked at Jonah. He nodded slowly. Marin stepped forward and carefully, gently, placed Hope in Lydia's arms. The young woman's face crumpled. She held her daughter close, breathing in the scent of her, touching her face, her hands, her tiny feet, as if confirming she was real. You're alive, Lydia sobbed. You're alive. Oh God, you're alive. Hope, who'd been fussing moments before, went quiet. She stared up at Lydia with those knowing gray eyes, and something seemed to click into place, some recognition deeper than memory. Mama, Hope said clearly. It was the second time Jonah had heard her speak, and it shattered him all over again. Lydia looked up at Marin through her tears. Thank you. Thank you for saving her. Thank you for loving her when I couldn't. She's extraordinary, Marin said softly. And she's yours. She was always yours. The moment broke when hoofbeats thundered down the street. Judge Blackthorne arrived with a dozen more men, all armed, all loyal to him. He took in the burning schoolhouse, the gathered crowd, and his daughter holding the baby he'd tried to kill. His face went pale, then red with fury. Lydia, get away from them. That child is dangerous to our family. This child is my daughter, Lydia screamed. You tried to kill her. You lied to me. You destroyed everything I loved because you cared more about your reputation than your own flesh and blood. I did what was necessary to protect you. You did what was necessary to protect yourself, Lydia's voice rang out across the crowd. I know about Mateo. I know you told me he abandoned me when you're the one who drove him away. Where is he? What did you do to him? Blackthorne's jaw clenched. That Mexican bastard got what he deserved. His name was Mateo Cruz, and I loved him. And now I'm going to find him, and we're going to raise our daughter together, and there's nothing you can do to stop us. The hell there isn't. Blackthorne gestured to his men. Take the child, arrest these people, all of them, charge them with kidnapping, arson, murder, whatever it takes. But his men didn't move. They looked at Lydia holding her baby, at the townspeople standing together despite their fear, at the burning schoolhouse that represented everything Blackthorne had become. Sir, one of the deputies said quietly, maybe we should talk about this. Figure out what really happened. I know what happened. I gave you an order. You gave us an order to help you cover up attempted murder, Sheriff Monroe said. His voice was steady now, his decision made. I can't do that. I won't do that. Blackthorne stared at him in disbelief. You're refusing. You work for me. I work for the law, and the law says you can't kill babies just because they're inconvenient. I'll have your badge. I'll have all your badges. You'll never work in this territory again. Maybe not, Sheriff Monroe said, but I'll sleep better at night. One by one, the deputies holstered their weapons and stepped back. Blackthorne's hired guns looked at each other, clearly calculating whether loyalty to him was worth dying for. The answer, apparently, was no. Blackthorne stood alone. For a moment, Jonah thought the judge might draw a weapon and try to shoot them all himself. The fury in his eyes was that bright, that consuming. But then something changed. Some calculation shifted behind those storm cloud eyes. This isn't over, Blackthorne said quietly. I built this town. I own this territory. One setback doesn't change that. You think you've won? You've won nothing. I'll tie this up in courts for years. I'll make sure none of you can earn a living. I'll destroy every single person who stood against me here today. Try it, Samuel Pierce called out. We've got witnesses, we've got testimony, and we've got the truth on our side. The truth is what I say it is, Blackthorne said. Then he looked at his daughter, and for just a moment the mask slipped. Jonah saw something almost human underneath, grief maybe, or regret. Lydia, please, everything I did to protect you. You did it to protect yourself, Lydia said, and you lost me in the process. Goodbye, Father. She turned and walked away, still holding Hope, and she didn't look back. Blackthorn stood in the growing dawn light, watching his daughter disappear into the crowd. Then he climbed back into his carriage and drove away, and Jonah wondered if this was really the end or just the beginning of something worse. The sun rose over Ironwood that morning like a promise or a threat, depending on who was watching. Jonah stood in the smoldering ruins of the schoolhouse, exhaustion settling into his bones like winter cold, and knew that Blackthorn's retreat was tactical, not permanent. Men like the judge didn't accept defeat. They regrouped, recalculated, and came back harder. Marin appeared beside him, her face smudged with soot, her dress torn at the hem. The town council is meeting at the church. They want to talk to us, to Lydia too. About what? Giving hope back to Blackthorn to keep the peace? I don't know, but we should go. We need allies, and right now we'll take what we can get. The church was packed when they arrived. Every pew was filled with townspeople who'd either fought alongside them or watched from their windows, too frightened to intervene. Lydia sat in the front row, with Hope sleeping against her shoulder, and when she saw Jonah and Marin, she stood and embraced them both. I don't know how to thank you, Lydia said, her voice thick with emotion. You gave me back my life, both of you. We didn't do anything except refuse to let an innocent child die, Marin replied. Any decent person would have done the same. But most people didn't. Most people were too afraid of my father. Lydia looked down at Hope, brushing a finger across her daughter's soft cheek. I was too afraid of him, too. For my whole life, I let him make my decisions, tell me what to think, who to love. When I fell in love with Mateo, I thought, finally, I'd found something my father couldn't control. But I was wrong. What happened to Mateo? Jonah asked gently. Do you know? My father said he took money and disappeared, said he never loved me, that he was just after the Blackthorn fortune. But Mateo wasn't like that. He was kind and honest, and he talked about our future like it was the only thing that mattered. Lydia's voice broke. I need to find him. I need to know if my father was lying about that too. The church doors opened and Mayor Harrison entered, flanked by several council members. Harrison was a thin man with nervous hands who owed his position to Blackthorn's backing, and he looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Thank you all for coming, Harrison began, his voice wavering. We're here to discuss the unfortunate events of last night, the destruction of the schoolhouse, the violence, the accusations against Judge Blackthorn. Accusations? Samuel Pierce stood up from his pew. We've got eyewitnesses. We've got testimony from his own daughter. Those aren't accusations, Mayor. Those are facts. Be that as it may, we need to consider the broader implications. Judge Blackthorn is a powerful man with powerful friends. If we move against him without ironclad proof, he could destroy this entire town, close the mines, withdraw his investments. We'd all suffer. So you want us to pretend it didn't happen? Marin's voice cut through the murmurs of agreement. You want us to let him get away with attempted murder because it's economically convenient? Harrison wouldn't meet her eyes. I want us to be smart, to wait for the territorial marshal to investigate properly, to follow legal channels instead of mob justice. Legal channels that Blackthorn controls, Jonah said flatly. How long do you think Lydia and Hope will survive if we wait for that? How long before Blackthorn makes them disappear permanently? We can't just... Yes, you can. A new voice spoke from the back of the church. Everyone turned to see a weathered Mexican man standing in the doorway, his arm in a makeshift sling, his face bruised but his eyes burning with purpose. You can stand up to him. You can fight. Because if you don't, he'll keep taking and taking until there's nothing left. Lydia's face went white, then red. Then she was running down the aisle, hope bouncing in her arms, tears streaming down her face. Mateo? She whispered. Mateo? Is that really you? The man stumbled forward, and they crashed together in an embrace that made half the church look away from the intimacy of it. Lydia was sobbing, saying his name over and over, while Mateo held her and their daughter with his one good arm and whispered things in Spanish that Jonah couldn't hear but could feel. When they finally pulled apart, Lydia was touching Mateo's face like she was afraid he might disappear. I thought you were dead. I thought my father killed you. He tried, Mateo said grimly. His English was accented but clear. He had 3 of his men beat me and leave me for dead in the desert 20 miles outside town.
Told me if I ever came back, he'd finish the job. But I couldn't stay away. Not when I heard rumors about a baby found in the creek. Not when I realized what he might have done. How did you survive? Prospectors found me, took me to a mining camp, nursed me back to health. Took 2 months before I could ride again. I came back 3 days ago and heard everything. About you thinking the baby was dead, about these people saving her, about the judge claiming her as his own. Mateo looked at Jonah and Marin with something like reverence. Thank you. Gracias. You saved my daughter's life. I owe you everything. You don't owe us anything, Jonah said, but we could use your testimony. If you're willing to stand against Blackthorn publicly, tell people what he did to you. I'm willing to do more than testify.
Mateo's jaw set in a way that reminded Jonah of himself. I'm willing to take him down, whatever it takes. Mayor Harrison cleared his throat nervously. Mr. Cruz, I understand you're upset, but vigilante justice isn't the answer. We have laws, procedures. Your laws didn't protect my family, Mateo shot back. Your procedures didn't stop Blackthorn from trying to kill my daughter, so forgive me if I don't trust them now. What exactly are you proposing? I'm proposing we find evidence, real evidence that even Blackthorn's money can't make disappear. Claire Thompson said he kept ledgers, records of every shady deal, every bribe, every crime he's committed over the years. If we can find those ledgers, we can end him. Where would he keep something like that? Sheriff Monroe asked. He'd been sitting quietly in the back, but now he leaned forward with interest. His office? His home? His vault, Mateo said. In the basement of his mansion. I used to work there. I saw him lock documents away. He's paranoid about keeping evidence of his power. Thinks it protects him, that if anyone moves against him, he can bring them down too. Breaking into Blackthorn's vault? That's suicide, one of the council members protested. Maybe, but it's also our only shot at real justice. Mateo looked around the church. I'm going in whether anyone helps me or not. I owe my daughter that much. I owe Lydia, but I won't ask anyone else to risk their lives. You're not going alone, Jonah said immediately. Marin grabbed his arm. Jonah, you can't. If you're caught, if I don't try, Blackthorn wins. He gets to keep terrorizing this town, keep destroying lives. I didn't pull Hope out of that creek just to hand her back to the man who threw her in. Jonah looked at Marin, saw the fear in her eyes, but also the understanding. She knew what it meant to fight for something worth keeping. Besides, I was a ranger. I know how to get in and out of places I'm not supposed to be. I'm coming too, Samuel Pierce announced, standing up with his rifle. Someone needs to watch your backs. And me, Martha Chen added. I can pick locks. My late husband taught me. One by one, people stood up. Not everyone. Fear still held its grip on many. But enough. Enough to show that Blackthorn's power over Ironwood was starting to crack. Sheriff Monroe stood last. I can't officially sanction this, but I can't officially stop it either. And if you happen to find evidence of crimes that fall under my jurisdiction, well, I'd be obligated to investigate. It wasn't much, but it was something. They spent the rest of the day planning. Mateo drew maps of the Blackthorn mansion from memory, marking guard positions, weak points in the perimeter, the location of the vault. Martha Chen examined the lock mechanisms and pronounced them difficult, but not impossible. Samuel Pierce coordinated weapons and watch positions, and Lydia, holding Hope, watched it all with tears in her eyes. I should hate him, she said quietly to Marin as they sat together in what remained of the schoolhouse. My father tried to kill my daughter. He drove away the man I love. He's lied to me my entire life. But part of me still remembers when he was different, when my mother was alive before the power consumed him. Part of me still loves the father he used to be. That doesn't make you weak, Marin replied. It makes you human. Love doesn't just disappear because someone hurts us. Sometimes that's the cruelest part. Did you love your husband, Thomas, was it? I did, very much. We had so little time together, but it was good time, real time. When he died, I thought I'd never feel anything again. Then Jonah walked through my door with Hope, and suddenly I was feeling everything all at once. Marin looked at Lydia. What will you do? After this is over? You can't stay in Ironwood with your father still here. I know. Mateo has family in New Mexico.
He inherited some land from his grandfather, not much, but enough to start over. We talked about it earlier, about taking hope and building a life somewhere his name doesn't cast shadows. Lydia paused. You could come with us. You and Jonah. Hope loves you both. We could all, I don't know, be a family, the four of us raising her together. Marin's breath caught. You'd want that? After everything you saved her life. You loved her when she had no one else. You're as much her parent as I am. Lydia's voice was firm. And I think we could all use a fresh start, all of us together. Before Marin could respond, Jonah appeared in the doorway. It's time. Sun's setting. Blackthorn's having dinner with the territorial congressman tonight. Mateo confirmed it. The mansion will be less guarded than usual.
They gathered in the twilight. Jonah, Mateo, Samuel, Martha, and two others willing to risk everything. Sheriff Monroe provided a distraction, riding up to the mansion's front gate with a deputy to discuss some fabricated legal matter. The guards focused on them while Jonah's group slipped through the garden on the east side. The Blackthorn mansion was everything Ironwood wasn't. Elegant, expensive, built to last. White columns gleamed in the dusk. Manicured lawns stretched toward ornate gates. It was a statement of power, of permanence, of a man who believed himself untouchable. They were about to prove him wrong. Martha Chen worked on the servants' entrance lock while the rest stood watch. The minutes stretched like hours. Jonah's hand rested on his Colt, ready for the alarm to sound, for guards to come running, for everything to go wrong. Then Martha whispered, "Got it." They slipped inside. The mansion's interior was as intimidating as its exterior. Dark wood paneling, oil paintings of stern-faced ancestors, thick carpets that muffled their footsteps. Mateo led them through the maze of hallways, moving with the confidence of someone who'd walked these paths 100 times. The vault is through the library, down the basement stairs, he whispered. There's usually one guard at the library door, but with the sheriff distracting them, a door opened ahead. They froze. A young maid emerged carrying linens, humming softly to herself. She looked up, saw them, and her eyes went wide. It was Clara Thompson. For one terrible moment, Jonah thought she'd scream. Then Clara's face set with determination. The guard at the library stepped away to eat dinner, she said quietly. You have maybe 10 minutes. The vault combination is 23-7-91. Judge Blackthorn's daughter's birthday, the real date, not the one he tells people. She pressed a key into Mateo's hand. This opens the ledger drawer. Be quick. Be quiet. And if you find what I think you'll find, burn it all to the ground. She walked away before they could thank her. The library was massive. 2 stories of books that Blackthorn had probably never read, purchased for show rather than substance. The basement door was hidden behind a false bookshelf that swung open with a soft click. They descended into darkness lit only by Martha's oil lamp. The vault stood at the end of the basement, a massive iron box built into the foundation. Mateo spun the combination dial with steady hands. 23-7-91. The lock clicked. The door swung open. Inside were shelves of ledgers, boxes of documents, stacks of papers that represented decades of corruption. Jonah grabbed the nearest ledger and opened it, scanning the entries by lamplight. Bribes to territorial officials. Payments to have competing businesses burned down. Contracts with hired killers. Falsified land deeds. Election tampering. The list went on, each entry meticulously documented in Blackthorn's own handwriting, as if he was proud of it. Dear God, Samuel breathed, reading over Jonah's shoulder. He's been running this territory like his personal kingdom for 20 years. Take everything, Jonah ordered. Every page, every ledger, we need it all. They worked quickly, stuffing documents into canvas bags. Martha found a separate box labeled Insurance, evidence Blackthorn had collected on his allies, information he could use to destroy them if they turned against him. It was brilliant and terrifying, a web of mutually assured destruction that kept everyone in line. They were almost finished when footsteps echoed from the stairs. Someone's coming, Mateo hissed. Multiple people. Jonah made a split-second decision. Samuel, Martha, take the bags and go. Back the way we came. Mateo and I will hold them off. We're not leaving you, Tsat. That's an order. Get that evidence to Sheriff Monroe. Nothing else matters. Samuel and Martha ran. Jonah and Matteo positioned themselves behind the vault door, weapons drawn, as the footsteps grew closer. Judge Blackthorne descended the stairs flanked by 4 armed men. He looked unsurprised to find them there, as if he'd expected this all along. "McCord, Cruz, I should have known you'd try something this stupid." Blackthorne's voice was calm, almost amused. "Did you really think I wouldn't have the mansion watched? That I wouldn't know the moment you set foot on my property?" "We got what we came for," Jonah said. "Those ledgers are already in Sheriff Monroe's hands. It's over, Blackthorne. You're done." "Am I?" Blackthorne smiled. "Those ledgers implicate half the powerful men in Montana Territory. If I go down, I'll take them all with me, and they know it, which means they'll do everything in their power to make sure those ledgers disappear, and you along with them." "Maybe. But at least people will know the truth." "The truth is what I say it is. Always has been." Blackthorne gestured to his men. "Kill them. Make it look like they died trying to rob my vault. No one will question it." The guards raised their rifles. Jonah calculated his odds. 2 bullets in his Colt against 4 armed men. Not good. But if he could buy Matteo a chance to escape, to get back to Lydia and Hope. The explosion shook the mansion. Everyone froze. Smoke began filtering down the stairs. Shouts echoed from above. One of Blackthorne's guards ran up to investigate and came back white-faced. "Sir, the library's on fire. The whole east wing. It's spreading fast." Blackthorne's calm facade cracked. "What? How?" "I might have spilled some lamp oil before we opened the vault," Martha Chen's voice called down cheerfully from somewhere above. "And I might have left a candle burning. Funny how these old places go up so quick." Chaos erupted. Blackthorne's men ran for the stairs, more concerned with saving the mansion than capturing intruders. Blackthorne himself stood frozen, watching his empire literally go up in smoke. "You'll die here too," he said to Jonah. "We all will." "Then I'll see you in hell." Jonah grabbed Matteo's arm and they ran, not up toward the fire, but deeper into the basement, following Matteo's remembered path to the old coal chute that opened onto the mansion's back lawn. They crawled through decades of dust and ash, emerged coughing into the night air, and ran. Behind them, the Blackthorne mansion burned like a torch against the Montana sky. Fire brigades arrived too late to save much of anything. By dawn, the east wing was a blackened shell, and with it went most of Blackthorne's carefully preserved evidence of power, though not, thankfully, the ledgers that mattered most. Sheriff Monroe arrested Judge Blackthorne at sunrise. The charges were extensive: attempted murder, bribery, conspiracy, fraud. The evidence was irrefutable. The territorial marshal, who arrived that afternoon in response to Jonah's telegram, took one look at the ledgers and immediately expanded the investigation. And Blackthorne, for the first time in his life, had no one left to bribe his way out. Jonah found Marin and Lydia waiting at the church with Hope. When Lydia saw Matteo alive and whole, she broke down sobbing with relief. They held each other while Hope gurgled between them, oblivious to how close she'd come to losing everything. "It's done," Jonah told them. "Blackthorne's finished. He'll spend the rest of his life in territorial prison." "And the ledgers?" Marin asked. "Safe. Monroe's got them locked up tight. They'll be used as evidence in trials that'll probably last years." Jonah sat down heavily, exhaustion finally catching up with him. "It's over. Really over." Lydia looked at her father's burning mansion visible through the church windows. "I should feel victorious. I should feel happy. But all I feel is sad. That's still my father. That's still the man who taught me to ride a horse, who read me bedtime stories, who used to be kind before the power corrupted him." "You're allowed to grieve," Marin said gently, "even for people who hurt us, especially for who they used to be." "What happens now?" Matteo asked. "We can't stay in Ironwood. Too many memories. Too many people who'll never see us as anything but scandal." "Then we leave," Lydia said firmly. "We take Hope, and we go to New Mexico like we planned. We build something new, something clean, something that isn't poisoned by my father's legacy." She looked at Jonah and Marin. "And if you'll come with us, we'd be honored to have you, both of you. Hope needs all the love she can get, and honestly,
So do Mateo and I. We're all broken people trying to figure out how to be whole again.
Maybe we can do it better together. Jonah looked at Marin. She was covered in soot, exhausted, probably in shock from everything that had happened. But when she looked back at him, her eyes were clear and certain. "What do you think?" she asked. "Ready to leave your cabin in the woods? Trade isolation for family?" Jonah thought about 8 years of silence, 8 years of grief and self-imposed exile, 8 years of believing he was done with life, with love, with hope. Then he looked at Hope, tiny, resilient Hope, who'd survived the impossible and brought them all together. "Yeah," he said, "I'm ready." They left Ironwood 3 weeks later when the aspens were just beginning to turn gold, and the morning air carried the first whisper of autumn. The wagon was packed with everything they owned, which wasn't much considering they were all starting over. Marin's books and teaching supplies, Jonah's guns and tools, Mateo's few possessions salvaged from his time in exile, Lydia's hastily packed trunk containing the only items from the Blackthorn mansion she'd wanted to keep, her mother's jewelry and a photograph of her father from before the darkness consumed him. Hope sat in Lydia's lap, watching the world pass by with those serious gray eyes, making small sounds of wonder at birds and clouds and everything new. She was bigger now, stronger, her cheeks pink with health instead of blue with death. Sometimes Jonah looked at her and couldn't believe she was the same half-frozen baby he'd pulled from the creek. Sometimes he thought that maybe they'd all been pulled from their own creeks that morning, given a second chance they hadn't dared to hope for. The town gathered to see them off, despite the early hour. Samuel Pierce stood at the front with his hat in his hands, looking older than his years. Martha Chen wiped tears from her eyes. Even Sheriff Monroe was there, having taken a few hours away from the chaos of Blackthorn's trials to say goodbye. "You sure about this?" the sheriff asked Jonah. "You could stay. Help rebuild the schoolhouse. God knows we need good people here now that half the town council's under investigation." "I'm sure," Jonah replied. "This place has too many ghosts for me, for all of us. We need somewhere clean to start." "Well, if you ever change your mind, you've got friends here. All of you." Monroe shook Jonah's hand, then Mateo's, then tipped his hat to the women. "Take care of that baby. She's something special." "We know," Marin said softly. Clara Thompson approached last, moving quietly through the crowd. She pressed an envelope into Lydia's hands. "Letters," Clara explained, "from your mother. She wrote them before she died, meant for you to read when you were older. Your father kept them locked away. I found them when I was packing up the mansion." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "She loved you very much. She would have been proud of the choice you're making." Lydia clutched the envelope to her chest, too overcome to speak. Clara touched her shoulder once, gently, then disappeared back into the crowd. They rode south out of Ironwood as the sun climbed higher, the wagon wheels creaking a steady rhythm that matched Hope's breathing as she fell asleep against Lydia's shoulder. Jonah drove the wagon with Marin beside him, while Mateo and Lydia sat in the back, surrounded by their belongings. Nobody spoke much for the first few hours. They were all too busy processing the enormity of what they were doing, the finality of it. It was Marin who finally broke the silence. "I was 17 when I first came west," she said, staring at the endless Montana landscape rolling past. "My parents died of cholera in St. Louis. I had nothing, knew no one, but I'd heard there were teaching positions in the territories. So I got on a wagon and just went. I was terrified the whole way, kept thinking I'd made a mistake, that I should turn back." What changed your mind?" Lydia asked. "I met Thomas. He was guiding the wagon train, and he had this way of making everything seem possible. Like the frontier wasn't something to be afraid of, but something to embrace. We got married 2 days after we reached Montana." Marin smiled at the memory. "My mother would have been horrified, but I've never regretted it, not even after he died. Because he taught me that sometimes you have to leap before you know where you'll land." "That's what this feels like," Lydia said quietly. "Leaping. I've spent my entire life being told what to do, what to think, how to behave. My father controlled everything. Even when I fell in love with Mateo, part of me was waiting for permission that would never come. But now..." She looked at Hope, then at Mateo, then at the open road ahead. "Now I'm choosing. For the first time in my life, I'm choosing." Mateo took her hand.
And you chose well, mi amor.
They stopped for lunch beside a creek, not Ironwood Creek, but one that ran clear and cold over smooth stones. While Marin and Lydia tended to Hope, Jonah and Mateo set up camp and got a fire going. The two men worked in comfortable silence, having developed an understanding over the past weeks that didn't require many words. Finally, Mateo spoke. "Thank you for saving my daughter, for believing Lydia when she stood against her father, for risking everything when you could have walked away." "I couldn't walk away," Jonah said simply. "Not from Hope. The moment she grabbed my finger in that creek, I was done for." "You love her." "Yeah, I do." Jonah poked at the fire, watching sparks rise into the clear sky. "I had a son once, Benjamin. He was 3 when the fever took him. Took my wife Sarah, too. I spent 8 years convinced I'd never feel that way about anyone again, that it was safer to be alone, to not risk that kind of pain." He looked at Mateo. "Then Hope came along and reminded me that some things are worth the risk. I know what you mean. When Blackthorn's men were beating me, when they left me to die in the desert, I thought about giving up, just letting go. But I kept seeing Hope's face in my mind. Even though I'd never actually seen her, I knew what she'd look like. Knew she'd have her mother's strength and her grandfather's eyes." Mateo's jaw tightened. That thought kept me alive. The idea that somewhere out there my daughter existed and needed her father. "She does need you, both of you. Lydia and Marin, too." Jonah hesitated, then said, "This arrangement we're making, 4 parents raising 1 child, it's unusual. People are going to talk. They're going to make assumptions. Let them talk. I grew up being told I wasn't good enough because of my blood, my accent, my name. I spent my whole life proving myself to people who would never see me as equal. I'm done with that." Mateo met Jonah's eyes. "What matters is hope. What matters is giving her a childhood full of love instead of lies. If that makes us strange or scandalous, so be it." They ate lunch together, all 4 of them plus Hope, and for the first time since they'd left Ironwood, the mood lightened. Lydia told stories about growing up in the mansion, carefully editing out the darker parts for Hope's sake, even though the baby couldn't understand. Marin talked about her students in Ironwood, the children who'd shown up at the burning schoolhouse with flowers and notes thanking her for being brave. Mateo described his grandfather's ranch in New Mexico, the Red Rock Canyons, the wide sky, the sense of space that made Montana look cramped. And Jonah listened, letting their voices wash over him, and felt something he hadn't felt in 8 years. He felt like he belonged somewhere. They traveled for 12 days, following the old trade routes south through Colorado and into New Mexico territory. The landscape changed gradually, Montana's pine forests giving way to prairie, then to high desert where the air was dry and thin and the sun beat down with relentless intensity. Hope adapted remarkably well, as if she'd been born for travel. She smiled at strangers in the small towns they passed through. She gurgled with delight at jackrabbits and tumbleweeds. She was, Marin observed, the most adaptable baby she'd ever met. She had to be, Lydia said when Marin mentioned this, to survive what she survived. I think part of her knew even then that life was going to require resilience. They encountered trouble only once, in a rough mining town called Socorro, where the local marshal took exception to their arrangement. He was a thick-necked man with suspicious eyes who'd clearly appointed himself guardian of public morality. "Let me get this straight," the marshal said, looking from Jonah to Mateo to the 2 women. "You're traveling together, all 4 of you, with a baby?" "That's right," Jonah said evenly. "And you're not married, any of you?" "Mateo and I plan to be married once we reach the ranch," Lydia said, lifting her chin. "But our personal arrangements are none of your concern. They're my concern when they offend public decency. We don't allow that kind of situation in Socorro. You'll move along, tonight." "We need supplies," Marin interjected. "Our food stores are low. We'll purchase what we need and be gone by morning." "You'll be gone by sundown or you'll be in jail. Your choice." Jonah felt the old anger rising, the same fury that had driven him to punch Blackthorn. But before he could say something that would make things worse, Mateo stepped forward. "Marshal, we're just trying to give this child a good life. We're not criminals. We're not troublemakers. We're a family. Maybe not a traditional family, but a family nonetheless. Is that really so offensive to you?" The marshal's face reddened. Don't lecture me about family, boy. I know what I'm looking at. White woman with a Mexican, unmarried, traveling with other people's spouses. It's indecent. My husband is dead, Marin said coldly. So is Jonah's wife. We're all widowed or unmarried, and even if we weren't, our arrangement still wouldn't be your business. Everything that happens in my town is my business. They might have argued further, might have pushed their luck until someone ended up arrested or worse, but a woman's voice cut through the tension. Sam, for God's sake, leave them alone. They're not hurting anyone. The marshal's wife, a practical-looking woman in her 50s, emerged from the general store with her arms full of supplies. She dumped them in the back of their wagon without asking permission. There. Food, water, medicine, enough to get you where you're going. She turned to her husband. And Sam, if you arrest these people for the crime of taking care of a baby, I will never forgive you. Do you understand me? Never. The marshal sputtered, but his wife's glare was formidable. Finally, he waved them away with disgust. Get out of my town, and don't come back. They left Socorro as the sun set and didn't stop until they were 20 miles down the road. When they finally made camp, Lydia was shaking with suppressed rage. It's going to be like this everywhere, isn't it? People judging us. People thinking they know what's best for Hope. People who can't accept that love doesn't always fit into neat little boxes. Some people will be like that, Jonah agreed, but some will be like the marshal's wife. Some will see what we're building and understand it. We just have to find those people and ignore the rest. Easier said than done. Everything worth doing is. They reached the ranch on the 15th day as afternoon shadows stretched long across the red earth. It wasn't much to look at. A small adobe house with a sagging porch, a barn that needed repairs, a windmill that squeaked with every rotation, and land that stretched to the horizon in every direction. But it was theirs, no blackthorn influence, no painful memories, just possibility. Mateo jumped down from the wagon and stood staring at the house with tears in his eyes. My grandfather built this with his own hands. Came up from Mexico with nothing but hope and determination. He raised my father here, taught him that land is more than property. It's legacy. It's belonging. It's beautiful, Lydia said, and meant it. They moved in that same day, claiming rooms and space, negotiating the practicalities of 4 adults and 1 baby living under the same roof. Jonah and Marin took the small room on the east side, agreeing without discussion that they'd share space since they'd been sharing everything else. Mateo and Lydia claimed the larger room on the west. Hope got her own tiny room between them all, a space they painted sunny yellow and filled with blankets and toys fashioned from scraps of fabric and wood. The first weeks were hard. The house needed constant repairs. The land needed work. They had to dig a new well, fix the barn roof, clear irrigation ditches that had silted up during years of neglect. They worked from dawn until dark, all 4 of them, with Hope strapped to someone's back or sleeping in a basket in the shade. But there was joy in it too. Joy in building something together. Joy in watching Mateo teach Lydia how to gentle a horse. Joy in Marin creating a small schoolroom in one corner of the house where she could teach Hope her letters someday. Joy in Jonah fixing things with his weathered hands, making something broken whole again. One evening, 2 months after they'd arrived, they all sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky impossible shades of orange and purple. Hope was learning to crawl, scooting across the porch with determination, while all 4 adults watched like she was performing miracles. I want to marry you, Jonah said suddenly to Marin. I know we haven't talked about it. I know we're already living like a family. But I want to make it official. I want to stand up in front of whatever passes for a church out here and promise to love you for whatever time we have left. Marin turned to him, eyes wide with surprise. Then she smiled, the first real, unguarded smile he'd seen from her since the day they'd left Ironwood. Yes, she said simply. Yes, I'll marry you. We could have a double wedding, Lydia suggested, looking at Mateo. If you're willing, if it wouldn't be too strange. Nothing about us is traditional, Mateo replied with a laugh. Why start now? So they did. They found a priest in the nearest town who was willing to overlook the unconventional nature of their situation, and they got married on a crisp November morning with Hope as their only witness. The ceremony was simple, the word standard, But the promises they made felt revolutionary. Two couples committing to love and family and raising one child together in defiance of everyone who said it couldn't work. The priest seemed confused but moved. "I've never performed a ceremony quite like this," he admitted. "But I can see God's love in all of you, in how you look at each other, in how you care for that child. Whatever form your family takes, it's blessed." They returned to the ranch as two married couples sharing one home, one purpose, one precious daughter. Winter came hard and fast that year, bringing snow that buried the desert and turned the red rocks white. They huddled together in the small house, keeping the fires burning, telling stories to pass the time. Jonah taught Hope, who was walking now, stumbling but determined, how to stack blocks. Marin read to her from the books they'd brought. Mateo sang Spanish lullabies that his grandfather had sung to him. Lydia sewed clothes for her daughter's growing body, each stitch an act of love and reclamation. And slowly, imperceptibly, they healed. Jonah woke one morning in early December and realized he'd laughed the day before. Really laughed, from deep in his belly, at something ridiculous Hope had done. He couldn't remember the last time that had happened. Maybe before Sarah and Benjamin died. Maybe never. Marin caught him smiling at breakfast. "What are you thinking about?" "About how I expected to die alone in that cabin in Montana. About how wrong I was. About how grateful I am to be wrong." She took his hand. "Me too." Christmas came, and they celebrated it together with a small tree Mateo and Jonah had cut from the foothills, decorated with paper chains Marin and Lydia had made. They gave Hope simple presents: a wooden horse Jonah had carved, a doll Lydia had sewn, a picture book Marin had ordered from back east. But the real gift was watching Hope's face light up with wonder, seeing her surrounded by 4 people who would die to protect her. "She won't remember this," Lydia said, watching Hope play. "She's too young. She won't remember the creek or Ironwood or how we all came together. Someday we'll have to tell her the story." "We'll tell her," Jonah agreed, "but not as a tragedy, as a triumph. We'll tell her about how love won, how people who started as strangers became family, how the coldest waters can lead to the warmest hearts." That night, after Hope was asleep and the house had settled into quiet, the 4 of them sat together around the fire. They'd done this most nights since arriving at the ranch, just sitting, talking, being together in a way that felt both revolutionary and completely natural. "I got a letter from Sheriff Monroe," Jonah said, pulling the envelope from his pocket. "The trials are wrapping up. Blackthorn got life in prison. So did most of his accomplices. The territorial governor is talking about reforming the whole legal system in Montana." "And my father?" Lydia asked quietly. "How is he?" "Monroe says he's broken. Keeps insisting he did everything for you, that he was protecting you. Maybe he believed that. Maybe in his mind he was the hero of the story." Lydia stared into the fire. "I wrote him a letter last week. Haven't sent it yet, probably won't, but I needed to say the things I never got to say. About how he hurt me. About how I forgive him anyway. About how I hope he finds peace, even though he doesn't deserve it." "Forgiveness is for you, not him," Marin said gently. "I know. And maybe someday I'll actually feel it instead of just saying it." Mateo cleared his throat. "I've been thinking about something. About Hope's future. About what we tell her as she grows up. She's going to ask questions. About why she has 4 parents instead of 2. About what happened in Montana. About her grandfather." "We tell her the truth," Jonah said. "Age-appropriate truth, but truth nonetheless. She deserves to know her story. All of it. Even the hard parts? Especially the hard parts. Because they're what made us who we are. They're what made this family possible." They sat in silence for a while, watching the flames dance. Then Hope cried out from her room, not distressed, just wanting company. All 4 of them rose automatically, a coordinated movement they'd perfected over months of shared parenting. But Lydia got there first. She picked up Hope, held her close, breathed in the sweet baby smell of her. "Shh, mijija, Mama's here. We're all here. Always." Hope settled immediately, content in her mother's arms. But her eyes stayed open, looking around the small room at the 4 faces surrounding her. And Jonah could have sworn he saw recognition there. Not memory, exactly. She was too young for that. But knowledge. Deep, instinctive knowledge that she was loved, that she was safe, that she belonged. They stood like that for a long moment, the four of them encircling Hope, and Jonah thought about how far they'd all come. From the frozen creek to this warm room, from isolation to family, from despair to hope. Hope. That's what she was. That's what she'd always been. The tiny voice that had called him back to life, the small hand that had pulled them all from their own drowning waters, the impossible miracle that had proven love was stronger than corruption, family was stronger than blood, and second chances were real. Outside, snow began to fall again, soft and silent. Inside, the fire burned warm, and in that small adobe house in the New Mexico desert, 4 broken people and 1 perfect baby proved that sometimes the most unconventional families are the strongest ones. Spring came to New Mexico with a violence that surprised them all. The snow melted in rushing torrents that turned dry arroyos into rivers overnight. Wildflowers exploded across the desert in impossible shades of purple and gold. The land that had seemed so barren in winter revealed itself as something alive and fierce and beautiful. Hope turned 1-year-old on a morning when the sky was so blue it hurt to look at. They didn't know her actual birthday. Dr. Brennan had estimated she was about 4 months old when Jonah pulled her from the creek, so they'd chosen a date that felt right. March 15th. The Ides of March, Marin had pointed out with a wry smile, which seemed appropriate for a child whose life had been marked by both betrayal and salvation. They celebrated with a cake Lydia had learned to bake, using precious sugar they'd bought in town. Hope smashed her face into it with gleeful abandon, getting frosting in her hair and all over her yellow dress, laughing that pure baby laugh that made everything else in the world disappear. Jonah watched her and felt his heart do something it hadn't done in 9 years. It felt full. "She's walking better," Mateo observed as Hope toddled across the porch, chasing a butterfly. "Soon she'll be running, then we'll really be in trouble." "We're already in trouble," Marin said with affection. "She's got all 4 of us wrapped around her little finger, and she knows it." It was true. Hope had learned early that she had 4 sources of comfort, 4 people who would drop everything when she cried, 4 laps to curl into when she was tired. She played them expertly, though not manipulatively. She simply understood, in the way children understand things, that she was loved from every direction. The ranch was thriving now. They'd planted crops, corn, beans, squash, using techniques Mateo's grandfather had passed down. They'd acquired chickens, a milk cow, and 2 horses. Jonah had built a better barn, fixing the roof and reinforcing the walls until it could withstand the desert storms. Marin had started a small school, teaching not just Hope, but the children from neighboring ranches who rode in twice a week for lessons. Lydia had discovered she had a gift for animal husbandry, nursing sick livestock back to health with patience and intuition. And Mateo had transformed. The broken man who'd stumbled into Ironwood seeking his daughter had become the heart of their small community. He sang while he worked. He told stories that made Hope shriek with laughter. He looked at Lydia like she was the answer to every question he'd ever asked. But the past had a way of finding people, even in the middle of the New Mexico desert. The letter arrived in late April, delivered by a postal rider who'd come 20 miles out of his way to find them. It was addressed to Lydia in handwriting she recognized immediately, her father's handwriting. She stood on the porch holding the envelope like it might burn her, her face pale. Mateo appeared beside her, putting a hand on her shoulder. "You don't have to read it," he said gently. "You don't owe him anything." "I know, but I think I need to, for my own peace, if nothing else." She opened it carefully, unfolding the single page covered in her father's precise script. The others gave her privacy, retreating into the house with Hope, but Jonah watched through the window as Lydia read. He saw her face crumple, saw tears fall, saw her hand shake so badly that Mateo had to take the letter from her before she dropped it. When she finally came inside, her eyes were red, but her voice was steady. "He's dying," she said quietly. "Consumption. The prison doctor gives him maybe 3 months. He wants to see me, to see Hope. He says he wants to make amends before he dies." The room went silent except for Hope's babbling as she played with wooden blocks on the floor. "What do you want to do?" Marin asked. I don't know. Part of me thinks he doesn't deserve forgiveness, that he should die alone like he would have let Hope die. But another part of me remembers the father he was before my mother died, before power corrupted him. That father would have moved heaven and earth for me. Lydia looked at Hope, who toddled over and was pulling herself up using Lydia's skirt. And I keep thinking, what would I want Hope to do? If I made terrible mistakes and was dying, would I want her to visit me? Would I want one last chance to tell her I loved her? That's different, Jonah said. You would never try to kill her. No. But people are complicated. We're capable of great love and great cruelty, sometimes toward the same people. My father loved me in his own twisted way. He just loved his power more. Lydia picked up Hope, holding her close. I think I need to go. Not for him. For me. So I can close this chapter and move forward without wondering what if. Then we'll go with you, Mateo said immediately. All of us. You're not facing him alone. It's a month's journey back to Montana. Maybe more. We can't all leave the ranch. Yes, we can, Marin interjected. Samuel Pierce wrote last month offering to help if we ever needed it. We can ask him to watch the place. The crops won't need harvesting until August. The animals can survive with basic care. This is more important. So they made plans to return to Montana Territory, to the place where everything had begun, for what they all knew would be the final confrontation with Silas Blackthorne. They left in early May, when the desert heat was just beginning to build. The journey north was easier than the journey south had been. They knew the route now, knew which towns were friendly and which to avoid, knew how to keep Hope entertained during the long days of travel. She was walking confidently now, and talking in short bursts that delighted them all. Mama Marin and Mama Lydia and Papa Jonah and Papa Mateo flowed from her lips with equal affection, and if people in the towns they passed through were confused by the arrangement, Hope's obvious happiness silenced most criticism. They reached the Montana Territorial Prison on a gray morning in early June. The building was a squat stone fortress that seemed designed to crush Hope, surrounded by walls topped with iron spikes. Jonah felt Lydia trembling as they approached the main gate. We can turn around, he said quietly. Right now. You don't owe him this. Yes, I do. Not for him. For me. Lydia straightened her shoulders. But I want all of you to come in with me. I want him to see what he tried to destroy. I want him to see what we built instead. The warden was a practical man named Edwards, who'd clearly been briefed on Blackthorne's crimes. He looked at their unusual group, 2 couples and a toddler, with curiosity but no judgment. He's in the infirmary, Edwards said. The consumption's advanced. He probably won't last the month. I'll warn you, he's not the man you remember. The disease has wasted him. They followed Edwards through gray corridors that smelled of carbolic and despair. Hope, sensing the heavy atmosphere, had gone quiet and clingy, wrapping her arms around Lydia's neck. When they reached the infirmary, Edwards paused at the door. I'll give you privacy, but I'll be right outside. If you need anything, just call. The infirmary held 6 beds. Only one was occupied. Jonah barely recognized Silas Blackthorne. The bull of a man who'd terrorized Ironwood had been reduced to a skeletal figure lost in white sheets. His hair, once iron gray, had gone completely white. His skin had a grayish tinge, but his eyes, those storm cloud eyes that Hope had inherited, were still sharp and aware. He looked up when they entered, and something complicated passed across his face. Surprise, grief, longing, shame. Lydia, he whispered, his voice a rasp. You came. I came, Lydia confirmed. She didn't move closer, just stood at the foot of his bed with Hope in her arms. Not because you deserve it, but because I deserve peace. Blackthorne's eyes found Hope, and he stared at her with an intensity that made Jonah's hand drift toward his gun. But there was no threat in that gaze, only wonder. She has your mother's face, Blackthorne said. I never noticed before. But she does. Around the eyes, the set of her mouth. She has her father's courage too, Lydia said, nodding toward Mateo. And her adoptive parents' kindness. She's surrounded by love, everything you tried to deny her. I know. Blackthorne closed his eyes. I know what I did, what I tried to do. I've had months in this place to think about it, to understand how far I fell. He looked at Mateo. You should be dead. I ordered you killed. I'm glad you survived, truly. I survived to be with my daughter, Matteo said evenly, to raise her with people who understand that family is about love, not control. I see that now. Too late, but I see it. Blackthorn's gaze returned to Hope, who was watching him with those knowing eyes. Could I speak to her? Just for a moment. Lydia hesitated. Jonah could see the conflict on her face, the daughter who still loved her father warring with the mother who needed to protect her child. Finally, she stepped closer, though she didn't let go of Hope. This is your grandfather, Lydia said softly to Hope. He made mistakes, terrible mistakes, but he's still family, and he's dying, and sometimes we show mercy even when it isn't earned. Hope stared at Blackthorn solemnly. Then, to everyone's surprise, she reached out a tiny hand toward him. Blackthorn's eyes filled with tears. His own hand, withered and trembling, rose to meet hers. Their fingers touched for just a moment before Hope pulled back, satisfied with whatever she'd accomplished. Thank you, Blackthorn whispered. Lydia, I need to tell you something about your mother. I know she loved me. Clara gave me her letters. Not just that. She knew about how I was changing, about the corruption. Before she died, she made me promise to protect you from becoming like me, to keep you innocent and good. I twisted that promise into something she never intended. I used it as justification for controlling every aspect of your life. His voice broke. I failed her. I failed you. I failed that beautiful child who deserved better than a grandfather who tried to kill her. Yes, Lydia said simply. You did. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I need you to know I loved you. In my broken, selfish way, I loved you. And if I could go back and change everything, I would. I would choose differently. I would choose love over power. I would choose you over my pride. Tears were streaming down Lydia's face now, but her voice remained steady. I loved you too, Papa. I loved the man you were before Mama died. And I grieve for that man every day. But the man you became, the one who tried to murder my child, I can't forgive that. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But I can acknowledge that you're suffering now, and that you seem to understand what you've lost. That's something. Blackthorn nodded, accepting this partial absolution. He looked at Jonah and Marin next. You two, the ranger and the teacher. You saved her when I tried to end her. You gave her a family when I tried to leave her with nothing. I don't understand people like you, people who choose to help strangers, who risk everything for what's right. But I'm grateful you exist, grateful you found her in that creek. We didn't do it for gratitude, Jonah said. We did it because it was right, because she deserved a chance. Everyone deserves a chance. I just forgot that somewhere along the way. Blackthorn's breathing was becoming labored. The conversation was clearly exhausting him. I have something for you, for Hope. The warden has it. I wrote everything down, the full truth about her birth, about what I did, about my crimes. Someday when she's old enough, you can show it to her. Let her decide what to think of her grandfather. Why? Lydia asked. Why confess everything now? Because lies are what destroyed us. I built an empire on lies and it collapsed into ash. I don't want Hope's life to start with a lie. She deserves the truth, even if it's ugly. He coughed, a wet sound that suggested the end was near. Will you tell her about me, when she's older? We'll tell her the truth, Marin said, about the good and the bad, about how you loved your daughter, but let power corrupt that love, about how you tried to kill her but failed, about how you showed remorse at the end. We'll let her decide what that means. That's all I can ask. Blackthorn looked at Hope one more time, his eyes memorizing her face. Be brave, little one. Be better than I was. Choose love, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. Hope, who'd been quiet through all of this, suddenly smiled at him. It was the same smile she gave everyone she loved, pure, uncomplicated, generous. For just a moment, Blackthorn smiled back, and Jonah saw a ghost of the man he might have been if different choices had been made. Then the moment passed. Blackthorn closed his eyes, exhausted. Lydia stood for a moment longer, looking at her father, then turned and walked out without saying goodbye. The others followed. In the corridor, Lydia leaned against the wall and sobbed, great wrenching sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside. Matteo held her while Marin took Hope, and Jonah stood guard, making sure no one disturbed them while Lydia grieved for the father she'd loved and lost long before he actually died. When the tears finally stopped, Lydia straightened and wiped her eyes. "I'm ready to go home now," she said. "Back to New Mexico. Back to our life. I got the closure I needed." "Are you sure?" Matteo asked. "We can stay. Wait until he—" "No, I said goodbye. That's enough. The man in that bed isn't my father anymore. My father died years ago. This is just the epilogue." They collected Blackthorn's written confession from the warden, a thick envelope sealed with wax, and left the prison. As they walked back to their wagon, Hope started babbling again, pointing at birds and clouds, her resilience a reminder that children always move forward. But before they left Montana entirely, Lydia asked to make one more stop. Ironwood had changed in the years since they'd left. The Blackthorn mansion was gone, torn down after the fire, the land sold to pay for the judge's legal debts. A new schoolhouse stood where the old one had burned, built with donations from townspeople who'd finally found their courage. Samuel Pierce greeted them like returning heroes, hugging each of them in turn and making ridiculous faces at Hope until she giggled. "Town's different now," Samuel told them over dinner at his house. "We've got new leadership, honest leadership. Sheriff Monroe's running for territorial marshal, and he'll probably win. The mines are operating fairly for the first time in 20 years. It's like someone lifted a curse." "Blackthorn was the curse," Martha Chen said. She joined them for dinner, bringing fresh bread and news. "But he taught us something important. He taught us what happens when we let fear keep us silent, when we choose safety over justice. We won't make that mistake again." "We heard about Clara," Marin said quietly.
"How is she?"
"Doing well. She took a job at the new school teaching the younger children. Says she's making amends for her years of silence by speaking truth to the next generation." Martha smiled. "She asks about Hope constantly. Would love to see her if you have time." They made time. Clara wept when she saw Hope, healthy and happy and surrounded by love. She held the little girl gently, as if she were made of glass, and whispered apologies Hope was too young to understand. "You saved her," Lydia told Clara. "If you hadn't told us the truth about my father, if you hadn't helped Jonah and Matteo get into the mansion, Hope would be dead. You're a hero, Clara. Don't ever doubt that." "I should have spoken up sooner." "You spoke up when it mattered most. That's what counts." They stayed in Ironwood for 3 days, reconnecting with the people who'd stood with them, saying proper goodbyes this time. On their last evening, they visited the creek, Ironwood Creek, where everything had begun. The water ran clear and cold, just as it had that February morning. Jonah stood at the exact spot where he'd found the burlap sack and tried to remember what he'd been thinking that day. He'd been so dead inside, so convinced his life was over. And then this tiny voice had called him back. "Mama," Hope said, tugging on Marin's hand. She pointed at the water. "Mama, water." "That's right, sweet girl. This is where your story began. Where all our stories began." They stood together at the creek's edge, Jonah and Marin, Lydia and Matteo, and Hope in the center of it all, and watched the water flow past. It looked peaceful now, harmless, nothing like the frozen death trap it had been 15 months ago. But Jonah knew appearances were deceiving. The creek would always be the place where Hope nearly died. It would always be the place where 4 broken people found each other. "Should we tell her?" Lydia asked quietly. "When she's older, about the creek?" "Yes," Jonah said firmly. "We tell her everything, about the cold water and the burlap sack, about her grandfather's attempt to kill her, about the town that stood up to him, about how 4 strangers became a family. We tell her all of it because it's her story. She has a right to know. And if it scares her, then we hold her while she processes it. We answer her questions. We show her that even the darkest beginnings can lead to the brightest futures." Jonah picked up Hope, who'd started to fuss. "She's strong. She survived the impossible. She can handle her own story." They left Ironwood the next morning and traveled south, back toward New Mexico, back toward home. The journey felt different this time, lighter somehow, as if they'd put down a weight they'd been carrying without realizing it. Lydia laughed more. Matteo sang constantly. Marin started writing down Hope's story, documenting everything so the details wouldn't be lost to time. And Jonah felt something he'd never expected to feel again. He felt at peace. They reached the ranch in mid-July, when the desert heat was at its peak and the sky stretched forever in all directions. Samuel Pierce had kept the place running smoothly, and he'd recruited 2 neighboring families to help with the heavier work. The crops were thriving, the animals were healthy, everything was exactly as they'd left it, only better. "Thank you," Jonah told Samuel as the old man prepared to head back to Montana. "For everything, for standing with us in Ironwood, for watching our home, for being family when we needed it." "Family isn't always about blood," Samuel replied. "Sometimes it's about showing up. You 4 taught me that. That little girl taught me that." He tipped his hat. "Take care of each other. And if you ever need anything, you know where to find me." They settled back into the rhythm of ranch life. The seasons turned. Hope grew. By her 2nd birthday, she was talking in full sentences and getting into everything. She learned to ride before she could write her name, sitting in front of Mateo on his horse and shrieking with laughter as they galloped across the desert. She helped Marin in the garden, carefully planting seeds with her small hands. She followed Jonah everywhere, asking endless questions about how things worked. She curled up with Lydia at night, listening to stories about a grandmother she'd never met, but who'd loved her even before she was born. When Hope was 3, they sat her down and told her the truth. Age-appropriate truth, carefully edited, but truth nonetheless. They told her about the creek, about the bad choice her grandfather had made, about how Jonah had saved her life, about how all 4 of them had come together to protect her. Hope listened with those serious gray eyes, processing information with a maturity that surprised them all. "So my grandfather was bad?" she asked finally. "He made very bad choices," Lydia said carefully. "But people are complicated, mija. He loved me, your mama, very much. But he loved power more. And that made him do terrible things. At the end of his life, he understood what he'd done wrong. He was sorry. That doesn't make it okay, but it means he wasn't all bad, just mostly bad. And you all saved me?" "Papa Jonah pulled you from the water," Marin explained. "Mama Lydia claimed you as her daughter when it was dangerous to do so. Papa Mateo fought to protect you, and I helped keep you warm and safe. We all saved you because we all loved you." Hope thought about this. Then she said, "I'm glad you saved me. I'm glad I have 4 parents instead of 1. It means I have more people to love me." "That's right, sweet girl. You'll always have more love than you know what to do with." As Hope grew older, they told her more. About Blackthorn's confession, which they kept locked in a safe for her to read when she was ready. About the trials and the town's transformation. About Clara and Samuel, and all the people who'd risked everything for a baby they barely knew. They told her these things not to burden her, but to show her what she'd survived, what she'd inspired, what she meant. By the time Hope was 5 years old, she understood her story in all its complexity. She knew she'd been both loved and rejected. She knew her life had begun in violence, but had been saved by courage. She knew she had 4 parents who'd chosen each other, and her. Who'd built a family that looked nothing like anyone else's family, but worked perfectly for them. On her 5th birthday, they threw a party that brought together everyone who mattered. Samuel Pierce traveled down from Montana. Martha Chen came with her new husband. Clara Thompson arrived with a gift she'd been saving, the blanket Lydia's mother had knitted before she died, meant for her grandchild. Neighboring ranch families came with their children, who all adored Hope and her unusual but obviously loving family. As the sun set and the children played and the adults talked, Hope stood in the center of it all and made a wish before blowing out her candles. "What did you wish for?" Lydia asked. Hope thought about it seriously. "I wished that everyone could feel as loved as I do. Because everyone should have 4 parents and a big family and people who would save them from creeks." The adults laughed, but gently, because they understood what she meant. Hope had been given something precious, not just life, but love multiplied by 4. Security that came from knowing she was wanted from every direction. The years continued to turn. Hope grew into a remarkable young woman, bold and compassionate, with Lydia's kindness, Mateo's joy, Marin's wisdom, and Jonah's stubborn courage. She learned 4 different ways to solve problems, 4 different perspectives on life, 4 different definitions of love. She became fluent in Spanish and English. She could ride like Mateo, shoot like Jonah, teach like Marin, and gentle frightened animals like Lydia. But more than any skill, she learned resilience. She learned that the worst beginnings could lead to the best lives. She learned that family was choice, not biology. She learned that love was stronger than fear, and courage was stronger than power. When Hope was 17, she asked to read her grandfather's confession. Her parents, all four of them, sat with her while she read about his crimes, his justifications, his regrets. She cried, but not for long. She'd known the story her whole life. Reading Blackthorn's words just made it more real. "Do you think he really changed at the end?" she asked Lydia. "Or was he just scared of dying?" "I think both can be true," Lydia replied. "People are complicated. They can be genuinely sorry and still have done unforgivable things. Your grandfather understood what he'd lost, but that understanding came too late to matter. I wish I could have known the man he was before. The one your mama loved." "Me too, Hiha, me too." Hope folded the confession carefully and placed it back in its envelope. "Thank you for saving me from him. For giving me this life, instead of whatever he had planned. For being brave when it would have been easier to look away." "We didn't have a choice," Jonah said. "The moment you grabbed my finger in that creek, we were yours. All of us." Hope smiled, that generous, uncomplicated smile that could light up a room. "I know. I've always known." The years passed. Hope fell in love, married a good man who understood her unusual family and embraced it. She had children of her own, raising them with the same abundance of love she'd received. Jonah and Marin grew old together on the ranch, still finishing each other's sentences, still working side by side. Mateo and Lydia did the same, their love deepening with each passing year until it was impossible to imagine one without the other. And through it all, the four of them, these four people who'd started as strangers, remained a unit. They shared grandparent duties with equal devotion. They celebrated every holiday together. They sat on the porch on summer evenings telling stories to Hope's children, making sure the next generation understood where they'd come from. On Jonah's 70th birthday, Hope threw him a party that brought together 3 generations of the family they'd built. As he looked around at all those faces, his children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, Mateo's and Lydia's extended family, Marin's former students who'd come from across the territory, he felt that same fullness in his chest he'd felt the day Hope first smiled. "What are you thinking?" Marin asked, settling into the chair beside him. She was 72 now, her hair white, her hands marked by arthritis, but still beautiful to him. "I'm thinking about that morning by the creek. How close I came to walking past that burlap sack. How different everything would be if I had." "But you didn't." "No, I didn't. And one decision, one moment of choosing to help instead of looking away, changed everything. Gave me this." He gestured at the celebration around them. "Gave us this." "Do you ever regret it? The complexity of it all? 4 parents instead of 2? "Never. Not once. This is exactly what we were meant to build." Jonah took her hand, feeling the familiar warmth of her palm. "We saved Hope, but she saved us too. She pulled us all from our own drowning waters." Across the yard, Hope was teaching her youngest grandson to walk, holding his hands while he took wobbling steps across the grass. She was patient and encouraging, giving him the same unwavering support she'd received her entire life. When the little boy fell, she picked him up, brushed him off, and encouraged him to try again. And watching her, Jonah understood the real gift they'd given Hope. Not just life, but a template for love. She'd grown up surrounded by 4 people who'd chosen each other despite every reason not to, who'd built family from courage and necessity and ultimately deep affection. She'd learned that love could take any shape, that family could be unconventional and still be strong, that the most broken people could come together and create something whole. As the sun set over the New Mexico desert, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, Jonah McCord, former Texas Ranger, recluse, survivor of grief, looked at the family he'd never expected to have and felt complete. The creek that had nearly taken Hope's life had instead given them all a second chance. The coldest waters had led to the warmest hearts. The smallest voice had changed everything. Hope caught his eye across the yard and waved, her smile bright and certain. Jonah waved back, and in that simple gesture passed a lifetime of love, gratitude, and understanding. She'd been a burlap sack in a frozen creek. She'd been a whispered word that shattered isolation. She'd been the impossible miracle that proved redemption was real. And now she was the proof that love, real, chosen, fought for love, could rise from the coldest waters and change the fate of hardened hearts forever. The end.